Welcome to Teaching Restored, where we are your weekly teacher council meeting, and we get to talk about all the great things about how to teach the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm Kevin Jones.
I'm Julie Hilliard.
And Julie, today is kind of a treat, I think, for both of us, because we have people writing in saying, okay, well, how do I do this? Well, what about this? You'll listen to an episode and you'll write in and have all these questions. And today is just a Q&A. It's just a kind of a rapid fire, maybe not so rapid fire. I think we have too much to do in an episode, to tell you the truth.
Oh, that's okay. We'll just do what we can.
We'll do what we can. We will get to all of these because we want to answer these. These are great. Well, I say answer them, but I think more correctly, it's along the lines of we're going to give our thoughts and ideas.
Yes.
Right? We don't have the answer for everything. It's just ideas.
I wish we did. I sure wish we did. If you ask my children, Mom has the answer to, oh, wait, no, that's not what they would say.
Whoops. Missed that one.
They think, yeah, they're like, no, that's not what they would say.
Yeah. Well, we have fooled others into thinking we may have some answers. So let's go forward and ask some of these questions. Are you ready, Julie?
I am ready. Let's do it.
Okay. I've narrowed some of these questions down to not be questions. They're just kind of statements sometimes. Some of them are longer explanations. So it's a mix. First off, this person wanted to know best use or uses of multimedia in lessons, what's overkill, and what's not enough.
Okay. Multimedia.
So we just recently had our number episode 50 about to PowerPoint or not to PowerPoint.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say, I wonder if that's the episode that prompted the question, right?
I think it was. So this is a great question. Julie, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure.
Okay, go for
it. I just went to talk and I inhaled and choked on my own saliva.
Welcome to being a human being. Well done.
I know. I don't like that part of humaning. Okay, so I might have a little bit of a different opinion than some people do on this because I tend to get a little bit ADD when it comes to the use of multimedia and the lack thereof. Mm-hmm. And so this person was asking what's overkill, what's not enough. I think that we've talked about the idea that people learn differently. And I do think that catering to the fact that some people are more visual is really important. And I think it's often a simultaneous thing when it comes to teaching. Adding videos in does add some interest, but it has to be on point. However, I get a little bit frustrated when the lesson is led by a video. And I get a little bit frustrated when the primary content comes from a video. That feels a little bit overkill to me. And I lose focus. I think that I'm most motivated to focus when there's a discussion happening, and I'm less motivated to focus when I'm being talked at. Mm-hmm. So that's the ADD part of me. And I'll share just one little example. I went to a Bible study recently for a group of women of a different faith. And I am planning to continue going. I absolutely loved it. And the insights that they shared were so fun and it was just lovely. But I noticed something because the primary content for the Bible study came from a video of a woman who was teaching. And she was teaching a live audience, but then it was a recorded version of her instruction. And it was harder for me, I realized, to connect with what was being said because I wasn't making eye contact with that person. And I felt like there was no space for discussion until she'd gotten through her entire message. And then we could talk about it. And it was so that I noticed myself in that moment, like emotionally disconnecting from what was being said because it was being done over video. So that's my personal opinion.
That's great. I follow a lot of that, actually. I often see, and I don't think this is done really intentionally. I have seen it done intentionally, but I don't think it's done intentionally where someone will use a video just to kill time because they don't know. Right. I don't have the time for a whole lesson, so I'm just going to throw a video in. Let's watch a whole conference talk kind of thing.
Right.
I don't get very happy about that one.
That's overkill, I would say, if we can
Absolutely
give an opinion.
overkill. Right.
Yeah.
So what is not enough though? So the way I would take this personally is I would start no media, none.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And learn how not to media, and then add pieces in.
Yes.
And then realize per class, because every class is going to be different, per class, what's appropriate and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, you're going to add something in and realize, okay, maybe I could do that piece in a different way because that had something to do with it, but it really didn't drive home a point. So it really wasn't helpful. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to change my strategy up for that media. Or maybe sometimes you might go a little bit overkill and watch a 10-minute video and you go realize, we could have had an awesome discussion.
Yeah.
So my thought would be to do no media, learn how not to do that, and then start adding those in to supplement and maybe drive home points. Because there is great media and and they can really, really help. But at the same time, we don't want to use it as a crutch.
Totally. I couldn't emphasize that more, like that it can be a support, but it should never be used as a crutch. And so I love your suggestion that you start no media and then you can find opportunities to bring it in, but you bring it in because you are choosing to have it play a supporting role. And so here's a question though, because you made a really good point, and we don't need to belabor this obviously, but just you did say something. You said, try a little bit here and kind of learn as you go, engage as you go. Well, how would you know if you're being successful with your use of media versus not being successful and having it not land well?
That's a great question. I think you said it earlier when you watch them become disengaged, when they feel being talked at and they're like, oh, that's, I'm starting to lose their interest or starting to lose the focus on what is important. And when you see the people's eyes glaze over, all of a sudden that's probably a little bit too much.
Yeah. Like I was going to ask you what it looks like. So you said, when people start to lose interest or whatever. So what does that look like? Eyes glazed over. Another one that I see is people pick up their phones.
I was going to say that. Yep.
Yeah. But here's a tough one. Sometimes people are picking up their phones to look something up that's just referenced, like a scripture. And so you can tell the difference though, when they're kind of being a little bit glancing sideways about it, they're likely not looking up a scripture versus kind of a more focused, inquisitive look. And then I think also when you see people start to actually physically fidget, that's another indication. I know that if I'm paying attention to something, my posture is different. My body language is different than if I'm kind of starting to zone out, and I do retreat a little bit physically versus when I'm interested, I'm a little bit more, physically kind of upright, if you will. So watching body language, I think, is a huge thing too.
I like that a lot. Yeah. Perfect. Cool. All right. There's one. Here's another one. Best ways or strategies to start lessons and to set the tone.
Oh, I like this one.
Isn't this good?
Yes.
These are great questions.
Do you want to start taking this one?
Okay. Okay. You probably know what I'm going to say, but I love starting with questions.
Okay.
And often the questions will be out of left field.
Okay.
All right. So maybe it's not a question about the gospel. Maybe it's a question about something that is very worldly or whatever. Or maybe it's a question that it's, how do I explain this? Challenges regular beliefs.
Okay.
Right?
So almost like something that is maybe on that, they're going to be kind of what?
Yeah.
Kind of have a reaction. That's
exactly.
What?
Yeah. So for example, you could, and I'm just making this up as I go, but sometimes I'll use a question. I'll say, so we all believe this, right? Well, then we also believe this. Aren't those contradictory? How are they contradictory, or how are they not contradictory? Oh, then we start to get into a discussion, and that pulls everyone in because their minds have to try to figure out this puzzle. And so what you're doing is presenting a puzzle in front of them, and our minds can't help when a question comes up but to try to answer it. And so it
Yeah.
sucks everyone in. And then you can say, all right, well, how do you feel about that? And if you're doing it right, you can almost have them teach the lesson and bring up the points that is the whole point of the lesson, rather than you telling them here it is, right? So I don't know. That's one way that I love to do it. What about you?
Okay, so really quick, I have to comment on your way because your way
Okay.
kind of freaks me out just a little bit. So
Okay.
I totally love it. And it's been interesting because in podcasts in the past, one of the things that you've done is you've done that. Like you started a podcast with a question.
Right.
And I find myself actually mentally having a little spasm attack and going, where's he trying to go? Where's he? I don't even know. Cause I don't know what we're going to be talking about. And so when you started with something like that, I'm like, ah, and I feel a little panicked. So when I think about being a teacher and I think about coming up with that question, Kevin, how do you come up with the questions? Like you're so good at like creating, like what I hear you saying is kind of like asking a question that will create a rub
Yeah.
because people will engage in conflict. And I don't
Yeah.
mean like
Yes. Yeah,
contention,
correct.
but I mean like mental conflict, right?
Yes.
And I'm not afraid of that part. I just don't know how to freaking come up with the questions.
I get it. Yeah, what you're basically doing in that case at least is you are creating a chasm between two different ideas that people know and have heard, but they have never been able to explain before. And now you're asking them to explain it. And so
Yeah, but how do you come up with the chasm?
so a lot of time, well, I don't know if it's just my brain that works that way. I don't know. But
Yeah.
as I'm reading the scriptures, I'm always questioning, oh boy, hold on, let me think. Okay, I had a question. Okay, I was reading scriptures today.
Okay.
And here's a great example of that. Okay, thank you for asking this, Julie, because I don't even realize that I'm doing these kind of things, and I'm doing it.
Because it's
Anyways,
so intuitive to you, but it's not intuitive to someone
sure,
like me. And I imagine other people probably share this dilemma as you're sharing the idea. So
right,
tell us.
okay.
Yeah.
So I was reading in the Book of Mormon, chapter 25 of Third Nephi, I think it was, and it talks. Maybe it was before that, but it was somewhere around there. Anyways, no. I lie. It wasn't. It was chapter 12. It was chapter 12 of Alma. Okay,
Whoa,
so.
that's a little departure.
Yeah. Because I'm in the Book of Mormon in two different places. Anyways,
That's fair.
so back Book of Mormon, chapter 12 of Alma, and it's Almelech, and he's talking to Zeezrom. And Zeezrom, he's got Zeezrom in kind of a trap almost, but he's talking about the resurrection and being held accountable and going to the judgment seat,
Okay.
and going before God and being judged. And it says that our bodies are perfectly created, perfectly resurrected. And then, so my mind is always thinking about questions. And I thought, okay, why do we have to be resurrected before we're judged?
Okay.
Okay. We know that that's the sequence, but why is that?
But
Why is
Yeah.
that sequence?
Okay.
And that could be a question that I could throw out of
Right.
why aren't we resurrected after we're judged? Because we can be resurrected into a body that, goes along with the judgment. Why is it beforehand?
Forward.
And so my mind had to go through this whole exercise of, okay, well, what about this? And I was writing out ideas, and I came to an idea that I felt was pretty good, but that's a question possibly that you could use at the start of a lesson to say, okay, what do you think? Why is that? That in and of itself isn't two conflicting ideas, but it doesn't have to be two conflicting ideas. It can just be something you've never thought of before. I've never heard that question asked before.
No, neither have I.
Right?
And so what I hear you saying is that the goal isn't necessarily the chasm itself.
No,
The
that's just
goal
one
is
tactic.
just check it. Like ask. So you're suggesting that as we are preparing a lesson or something like that, and we want to, like, that this might be a great way to start it. As we're preparing for it, we are asking ourselves questions the whole time and just taking note of our questions. And there we will almost inevitably come across a question that's like, well, why have I never asked myself that before?
Yeah.
And if you haven't asked yourself that question before, then you can think, well, maybe somebody else hasn't asked themselves that same question. And then taking that and using it to kick it off.
Yes.
Like that's kind of what you're suggesting, right?
Yes. So here's, I guess, I thank you, because that helped me kind of frame this in a way that I think people might be able to use it. As you're reading the scriptures, find something that everyone takes for granted and ask why.
Okay. That's a really, really good suggestion.
Right? Because we do take these things for granted. We just assume, okay, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
Well, why is it that way? And we can learn so much from trying to dive into that. When we ask why is it this way, then we start to uncover kind of the mysteries of God and
right.
understanding his motivations and his timing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, I know there are many different ways, but that's one way with a good question to start a lesson.
Okay. So now I want to go back and push though, because you did talk specifically about this idea of creating kind of a chasm.
Yes.
And then you didn't give an example yet of what that might look like, but I'm thinking back to a podcast that we did where you were trying to help instruct someone how they might teach about grace. And I remember that one, you talked about, you posed some questions that seemed to be conflicting, right? And so I don't remember what those questions were specifically, but do you offhand remember? Because I want to give people an example of what you're talking about when you create this opposition, almost like here's something we believe and we also believe this, but they seem to be at odds. Okay. And that's kind of what I heard you saying is another idea.
Right. Actually, a different question came up that I just thought of that I think would be great.
Okay.
Two different ideas. One idea, God is love. God loves everyone.
Oh, yes.
Right?
We've talked about this. Okay, keep going.
God loves everyone. Great. Well, what if someone says, the way you treat me, that is not loving me. And the way you treated them was sharing the gospel to them. Let's say it's a child who doesn't want to hear anything about the gospel, and you want to desperately share the gospel with them. And they say, that is not loving me. Okay, so which is it? So if God is love and you want to love your child, do you not ever talk to the gospel about them?
Or and anything that they don't like to hear.
Or maybe, anything, right? Yeah, exactly. Right.
Not
you will upset me if you talk about XYZ.
Yeah. And I don't feel like you're loving when you bring this up.
Right. So how do we put those two things together?
I love it.
How do we love like God loves and yet still love our child?
Right.
So there's one idea.
So I could see then, and I still think this is a really, really great suggestion, that starting it with a question, like starting it with some really thought-provoking questions to get people engaged. That's kind of like your way of getting them thinking out of the gate. And I could see going through, and as you're preparing a lesson, finding some of those points of conflict or issues that might come up in addition to, and this is almost a separate suggestion, starting with the rub is a great way to get people engaged. But also another great way is to just ask a really thought-provoking why question is what I heard you say.
Yes,
both
absolutely.
of those are awesome. Okay,
and by the way, those
sorry.
questions don't need to be answered. You don't have to find an answer for them, and that's okay sometimes.
Yeah, like you could just discuss thoughts for a minute,
right?
And I mean, I don't think that you pose like a rhetorical question at the beginning, because if the point is to get people really thinking and engaged, you want it to be a question that they at least attempt to answer. Fair to say?
Yes, very
as
fair.
a guideline.
Yes.
Okay. So when you asked the question, I had a couple of out of the gate things that I thought of, and one of them matches what you said. Todd would say you always start with a hook. And so I think a question could be a hook, right? That's one example of a hook. Another hook would be a story, like a personal experience.
Great.
And another hook might be a story of somebody else that helps to illustrate the point, but it gets people emotionally engaged. Stories are amazing, and I'm really bad at using them. And I'm also really bad at coming up with them, but it's something I'm working on because I recognize the value of it. And so a hook in the form of a question, in the form of a story, or even in the form of like, this is what we're going to learn today. By the end of this lesson, I hope you feel like you understand on a deeper level, or I want all of us to be able to, at the end of this lesson, articulate such and such and such in a way that we could share it with our friends not of our faith. Or so a hook could also be an objective. And
Good.
sometimes I will do that. Another thing that I sometimes do to start the lesson is I actually share a roadmap. And I know that that sounds a little bit crazy, but I'm such a linear thinker. And it helps me when people kind of go through and say, okay, this is where we're going to go today, so that they can anticipate kind of what direction we're attempting to move in. And it also has been a way for me to set some classroom expectations. Sometimes, like I have said on here before, I'll teach in groups and I'll feel like I almost don't get to any points because there's so much discussion, and it can be distracting and you can feel a little bit derailed at times.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of what I can do is, in setting up a roadmap, say, and like I did this on Tuesday, I said, here are the 3 questions we're going to discuss. But if we're not talking about those questions, I'm not actually wanting a bunch of discussion, because I think that there's a lot in terms of the context that we need to get through to really be able to answer those questions effectively. And so I did not invite discussion for the first part of the lesson. And then when we got to those questions, that's all it was
That's
discussion.
great. That's great.
And so I think starting with that can also be a way to do it, because you're setting expectations, and it gives you a chance to also say, okay, here are the kind of the rules for engagement, or the place where I'm going to ask you. So people can be like, okay, I'm going to be ready. Or, kind of understanding what their role as a learner is, so that they don't feel hesitant to participate as well. I think it frees people up if they know what you're going to want ahead of time. So that's just another thought.
Those are great.
That's it. That's all I had. I had written down my things when you first asked the question. It's like, was there one more? Nope, just those.
Just that. Okay. If I may, let me give a little idea. You said that it's hard to come up with a story.
Yes.
Okay. Let me give a little idea of something that I do that has really helped. And
Yes.
that is, anytime I have an experience that I think might be shareable, I write it down.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I have my phone with me. I type it in, or I'll voice it real quickly. And I have this treasure trove of stories that I can look through and go, that one
You're
one
so smart.
would fit. And it doesn't take long. Just any lesson in life that can be learned, you just write it down real quickly, type it in your phone, voice it, and then be done. Right?
Brilliant.
And then review that every now and then. Just remember what stories are there. And as you are teaching a lesson, you can go, oh, that story that I had 2 years ago, that would be an excellent way to introduce this.
I love that. And actually, ironically, I've started to do a better job of that, as this has been something that I've recognized as an area of weakness for me. I have this application, or I could call it an app, because that's what most people call it. I don't know why I just called it an application.
Application? Well, that's so formal.
Posh. So posh. So it's an app called Day One.
Yes.
That Todd and I share. And you can have different categories, and it's a journaling app. Mm-hmm. And so some of it's just straight, like a journal, but I've categorized it to be promptings and spiritual experiences and funny stories, and done some of that. And so it gives me a place to just easily go to. And I had this kind of nudge. I think it was a nudge from the spirit, to write something down just the other day. And I remember being like, and I know exactly where to write it down. I'm so glad I've got this habit now. But it's taken me, how many years to get there, where that started to click. So, amen, brother. I testify.
Good for you. True. Amen. That's right.
But my treasure trove is like this big compared to your treasure trove. I'll get there.
Good. And it takes time, and that's okay.
That is okay.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm still young.
Or if you hear a story of someone else, steal their story. Don't say that it's you, but steal the story. I heard a story once of, right? Great.
Right.
So many of those. Okay.
Right. I was so frustrated. I was in the temple the other day, and
is this a story?
This is a story.
Okay.
Look at me. Look how good I am.
I know it.
Okay, come along on the ride. Here we go. So there is a woman who's serving in the temple. Her husband's the temple president, and she and I are friends, and we started talking in her office. You know how in the
Yes.
temple at the bottom of the stairs, there's her office.
Yeah.
And she told me the story of a piece of art that's hanging on the wall. And the whole time she was talking, I was like, oh my gosh, I need a pen and paper. I need to take a picture of this piece of art. I wanted so badly to be able to store that because it was such a phenomenal story. And it fell out of my brain.
Oh
I'm like
no.
so frustrated about it. And it was so good. And so I realized just how, like, the minute you get out of the temple or something like that, I needed to have a place to write it. But then now I went to write down parts of it. I've got the parts that I could remember and other parts are falling out of my brain. So I had to call her. And anyway, but the art, I can't, it's in the temple only. It's a unique piece.
Is it
I'm
is it the
sad
one
about it.
just past the recommend desk?
No.
Okay.
No,
Oh.
it's in her office. It's in
Oh,
the
gotcha.
office near the chapel that you walk past when you're coming down usually, or because when you are coming, you go out of the chapel up the stairs of the
Yes.
Portland Temple. When you're coming down the stairs of the
Yes.
Portland Temple, and it's on your right hand side. So if you're facing the chapel, it's the one on the right hand side.
Okay. Yes.
Peek in, and there's a picture of a girl, and she's 14 years old, and it's God, if you ever see somebody in that office, say, what is the story about that painting?
Okay.
It is
Thank you.
beautiful. That you may
Okay.
want to edit that out because that's just stupid. I don't know why I just went down that. I'm
No, it's
sorry.
it's a great example though. Little things like that, we just go, oh, that's a great story. Start writing them down.
Write them down. It's so frustrating to me that I don't have that one on the tip of my tongue because it was so beautiful.
Great example.
So,
Thank you.
other people's stories. All right, Kevin,
Okay.
I'm sorry. We should move on.
Okay. There was a question that was kind of like that. I just teaching. No, okay, I can't find it. Anyways, all right, let's go to the next one.
Okay.
Is splitting up into groups as part of lesson helpful or productive?
Okay, so remember how I was
Oh,
writing
you're
down
excited about this
all
one.
of these topics? That is a great question. I want your opinion first.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to say it depends. It can be. I'll give a quick example, and I think I've shared this before. When I was Elders Quorum president, when Elders Quorum and High Priest were combined into Elders Quorum, I was asked to be Elders Quorum president, and I hadn't been in Elders Quorum for so many years, or High Priest
Right.
for so many years, and I finally got in there, and they are just the most boring. Oh my goodness,
How
they're
did you
just
really feel, Kevin?
killing me. So I said, done. We're not doing this. There
Uh-huh.
is no teacher. We're not going to have a teacher. And I sent them all a conference talk. And I said, here are the 6 questions I want you to think about as you read this. And then when we got together, we broke up into like 4 or 5. We discussed. We came together the last 10, 15 minutes and discussed everything that we discussed. And we taught each other. And that was an incredible way to do it. And I loved that. Not that that is the way to do it by any means, but for us, I felt that was a really neat way to do it. So I think it can really, really be helpful. At other times, I don't think it is helpful. If you don't give clear instructions and there's not a really, really good point to breaking up, then breaking up is just another tactic someone uses to mix things up, and it really doesn't work. I've seen it happen both ways. There's my 2
Okay.
cents.
So you brought up some super good points. So I think you said there are times when it's appropriate, times when it isn't, but you also said there are some ground rules for how you do it.
Right.
So what I'm going to extrapolate from what you just said is that one of the ground rules is that you have a clear reason for doing it, like a point to actually breaking up. You're not using it as a teaching strategy or something like that.
Right. And they have
Right.
to understand that
And
as
that point
well.
has to
Right.
be clearly
Yeah.
communicated to them. They have to understand what the objective is. And then the other part that I heard you say that could also play into that is that when you talk about them clearly understanding what it is that they're needing to accomplish, oftentimes you can actually give people some prep time.
Yeah.
So in other words, you said you gave them these questions beforehand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they came actually prepared to have a discussion. A couple of different ways that you might consider applying that. One is that if you're going to break people up into groups, that you have pre-thought through who you want to lead those group discussions and tell them, hey, we're going to break up into groups and I'm going to have several of you that are going to be assigned to help with that. And here are the questions that I want you to make sure get discussed, so that it shows forethought. And then you have like a discussion leader, and that person will feel responsible for making sure that the conversation stays on track. Because I think that one of the biggest problems with breaking up into groups and not having anybody that feels responsible is that you spend the first however many minutes going, oh, are you going to speak up when it comes to, oh, who's going to take the lead on this? How are we going to start? Who wants to talk? Oh, let's just be social instead. Blah, 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 blah. What happened this weekend? Oh, let's connect. And there's like this chit chat that wastes a lot of the time,
Sure.
and everybody not wanting to step on each other's toes, and nobody really takes lead. So you almost have to prepare someone to actually guide that discussion so that it can be time really, really well spent.
That's good.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
I like that.
and so I think that those are really important caveats to doing it. Here's another idea. I had this thing happen the other day that was actually so magical, and I loved it. And it was by accident. And now I will do it again on purpose. So I was going through and I was preparing the part where Christ is teaching the Beatitudes,
Mm-hmm.
right, in the Book of Mormon. And I was like, oh, we could have a whole lesson about every single one of these. And then I was like, I don't want to like just pick and choose which ones are going to be the most important. How do I do this? And I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to have people study one beatitude and then bring their insights. And what I did is I actually had them number off from 1 to 6. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the ones weren't even sitting together.
Mm-hmm.
They were separate from each other in different parts of the
Good.
room, and the twos were separate. And then I actually set up the ground rule, because chatty class, right? I set up the ground rule that if you were not assigned that beatitude, don't talk.
Oh,
And so
sure.
I'm like, I don't want us to discuss every single one of these. I want the insights of the people who have prepared to share.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing because every single person in that class spoke that day.
Oh, wow.
Every
I
single
love it.
person. And when you were like, we had, however many ones. And when we were talking about the first one, I could go from person to person to person, and they could build on what the other people had said. And I gave everybody the option. Like, I'm like, do you have anything to add? Do you have anything to add? Every single person had something to add. Like, it was amazing. And so I would do that again on purpose. So when you're breaking people up into groups, my suggestion is think outside the box. You don't even necessarily need those groups to collaborate. You just need them to have a clear objective. And I think that, when they are collaborating and they have a clear objective, that's great as well. But like, we can expand our thinking just a little bit around it, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. I love that. What a great idea. I'm going to use that.
You should. Like, it was magic. It wasn't even something I came up with on purpose. It just happened. It was awesome.
That is pretty neat. I'm going to do that. I like it. Okay. Let's see, splitting up into groups. Anything else that you think?
Yeah. The biggest caution that I have, actually, if I could just give a big warning,
Mm-hmm.
if you think it's dumb to be into groups, don't do it.
Good.
Like, if it hasn't gone well with people in the past, don't do it.
Right.
Like
if
just don't.
If the seminary manual says one idea is to split up into groups and then do this, and you think that it's not going to work, don't
do it.
Just don't.
Yeah. Like, and if you have had it not work before, it doesn't mean you shouldn't try it again, but don't do the same thing. Don't set it up the same way and expect different results, because that's just insane. So set it up differently.
Good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Good. Let me see. Okay, good. All right. Oh, this is so good. So many good ideas. Thank you. Let's see. Oh, we've kind of talked about this already.
Okay.
And it's one that I love, and it's one that you don't love. Are you ready? Best ways to get people uncomfortable in appropriate ways.
Best ways. I thought you said in inappropriate ways, and then I realized you didn't say inappropriate. You said appropriate.
inappropriate,
Inappropriate ways.
two different words, inappropriate.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. We just need to be clear about that.
Yes. Best way. Okay, let's first stop. Why?
Why would you want to make people uncomfortable?
Right. And in a previous very recent episode, I said that's part of what I do for a living is get people uncomfortable. Right. And it's almost fun for me. But
you like to see people squirm.
I do. I do. It's so bad. And my wife is like, no, Kevin, no. But actually, to do what I need to do, I have to get people uncomfortable or they're not going to change.
You know what's effective. You know it's an effective teaching strategy to make people uncomfortable.
Right.
No, I'm on board with that. I'm on board with that.
But not to take it too far. You don't want to do, I almost gave an idea that.
Don't give bad ideas.
No. There are some ideas that you just don't, there are some things that are not appropriate or, go too far. That's not what we're talking about.
And the other thing is, so I have made this mistake in the past in my effort to get people engaged, but also to prove that I'm not afraid to talk about difficult things.
Mm-hmm.
I have sometimes brought something difficult up to prove that point, which is not appropriate. Like it was about me. It was about me proving that I'm not uncomfortable talking about anything. It was not actually the right point to be discussed or emphasized.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so I know, that feels really kind of almost embarrassing to admit, but I think that sometimes people try to create stir and discomfort to prove that they're okay with it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And it's not about that at all. You're trying to make people uncomfortable to promote learning, because what I hear you saying, or what I've heard you say in the past, is that we learn best when there is some kind of a rub, because our brains are wired to want to get rid of the conflict. And so we engage in the conflict and we learn through that type of engagement, right?
Yeah.
And so while I agree with that, I also think you have to do a little bit of a gut check as a teacher that you're not making people uncomfortable for the wrong reasons.
Right. You want the uncomfortableness to lead to some type of growth, not just look at me or prove a point about yourself or them. It's to actually prove a point. Here's an example. A while ago, maybe a couple of years ago, we had the missionaries over for General Conference. Mm-hmm. And I said, so what do you think? Any surprises? Do you think any surprises will come up? They're like, no, I don't think they'll change anything. I said, they said, what do you think? And I said, well, I don't know. What would you feel if they asked the young woman to pass the sacrament? I'm like, oh, that's not going to happen. And I said, actually, they already do. And they stopped and were like, what? What do you mean? What? They do what? They do not what? They don't pass the sacrament. I said, yeah, they do. You sit in the pew, you pass it to a young woman, and the woman passes it to the next person. How is that any different? And they're like, what? And I said, I don't think that they're going to do that. I don't think that they're going to have the young women be up with the deacons and passing that. That's not, that I don't think that that's actually happening, but we need to expand our ideas and understanding that everyone is passing the sacrament to everyone. Mm-hmm. And what do the scriptures actually say? The scriptures actually say the administration of the sacrament should be done by the priests, and it is done by the priests. Mm-hmm. The scriptures say nothing about who passes the sacrament. Mm-hmm. And so that is right now, it is for the deacons to do, and great. Do I think it'll change anytime soon? No, I don't. As with so many other things, right? But we have to be open, because there have been things in the past that people, it is culture, and they take, that's right. Yeah. This is gospel. And then it changes and they're freaking out about it.
Yeah.
When when no, this is actually something that can change, and it's
Yeah.
okay to change, and it should change. So, if it leads to, a more realization of, in this case, it was more of a realization of what is culture and what is doctrine, and
Right.
what do the scriptures say, and let's think about this a little bit more. Why do the deacons pass the sacrament as opposed to the young women or whatever? But
Right.
also realize the same other. So that's, in that way, I put them in a little bit of an uncomfortable situation because they were thinking, oh, Brother Jones is going way off the deep end.
Right.
He's
Right.
right. He's going to
Yeah.
be free. No. I was just thinking outside the box a little bit. That's all.
Thinking.
That's okay.
Yeah. But I
Yeah.
think you also, again, with something like that, like what you were saying is that it's a really, the point that you were trying to make there is that we need to like have our minds a little bit more open.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
instead of just, accepting all of culture as gospel, we need to just kind of be like thinking about it just a little bit and understanding the difference between the two so it serves a purpose.
Right.
And I think that oftentimes, like, you have to create discomfort, though, around the point that you're actually trying to make in the lesson.
Hmm.
You don't create discomfort for the sake of creating discomfort.
Right.
You
Right.
create it for instruction, for instructive purposes, for an experience, for whatever. Like it has to serve the purpose of making the point that the lesson's about instead
Right.
of just creating discomfort for the sake of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't let it derail you either. I think that that's the other
Hmm.
thing is that
Hmm.
sometimes when you do something like that, you could actually end up having this huge conversation that actually isn't as productive. And so as a teacher, you also need to remember that you have the responsibility to bring it back to what it's actually about instead of letting people take it off and go.
That's a
And
really
that
good
is
point.
part of the responsibility of a teacher. And
Hmm.
so if you're comfortable with that, then it's safer to create discomfort versus if you are going to have a difficult time managing the discussion afterwards. I think you have to be cautious about it.
Hmm. Um, let me do one more story
Oh,
where it was
okay.
uncomfortable.
Okay.
And I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again. I was teaching seminary. When I was going to college, I taught early morning seminary, and we came to Alma 31, Rameumptum.
Okay.
And I called one of the kids up and I said, hey, I'm going to ask you to give the opening prayer like the Rameumptum. Will
Oh,
you
you
do
had him
that?
stand up on the table?
And so I said, all right, would you give the opening prayer? Sure. We all folded our arms and bowed our heads. And he stood up, put his hands in the air and said, oh, I mean, just almost
I
didn't
love it.
paraphrase the whole thing. And everyone was like,
I'm so great.
what the heck? And I said, well, okay. And I played along with it. I was like, thank you. All right. And then I went on with it and let that uncomfortableness sit. And then I said,
That's
okay,
awesome.
let's talk about this. That obviously wasn't appropriate. Let's do a real prayer. Okay. Then we did a real prayer. Then I said, okay, let's go back to that though. Why isn't that kind of a prayer appropriate? And we had this big, long discussion about it. And it was, right?
That is
Proving
so
it went to the
good.
point.
Right. You proved the point with an experience, but the experience itself made them uncomfortable in and of itself, teaching them about how inappropriate it was.
Yeah.
Oh, high five.
All right.
I loved it. Great
So
one.
good. I like that. Okay, where are we? All right, let's try another one.
Should we do? I think I probably maybe just one more. Does that sound okay?
Yep. Yeah, I think so too. I was gonna do this one, but I think that question might almost be a full one. Let's not do that one.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, this is a great one, Julie. This is for you. How do you determine whether the discussion you led as a gospel teacher went well? She or he, I don't remember who it was. Discussions often don't follow a set path, and it's not always visible if someone in the class is resonating with the direction of the discussion, or if they choose not to speak up. So how do you know that it's gone well?
Okay, this is such a good question. It's interesting because I got a substitute for my class while I was in Thailand last week. And the person that subbed for me kind of did a little email debrief with me and was talking
Good.
about how things had gone. And one of the things that he said was, "Man, I walked away kind of second guessing everything about it. And I was kind of trying to figure out, well, did that discussion go well or didn't it, and kind of started to replay everything in his mind. And I started to reflect on, how often I've done that same thing where I've gone back and I've replayed the discussion in my mind and tried to analyze whether or not it had gone well. And I have decided that we sometimes don't know, and that's totally okay.
Good.
Because sometimes the discussions that I'm like, wah, wah, I will hear later somebody come up to me and be like, wow, the fact that we focused on that, so-and-so said exactly what I needed to hear. Like, that was amazing. And I was like, that was like the lamest comment I heard the whole day. You know what I mean? Like, I'm obviously that's not the truth. That's an exaggerated description. But the point that I'm trying to make is that if we are working with the Spirit and doing everything that we can prayerfully to invite the Spirit, inviting the Spirit into our preparation, inviting the Spirit in as we open the class, seeking the guidance of the Spirit as we are having those discussions, we have to know that we will know when things are off track. I have been in a discussion and been like, nope, Spirit just left. Or, ooh,
yes,
something's not right. And that I have even said, I don't know what's not right about this, but I feel like we need to pivot just a little bit because something doesn't feel right about this discussion. Let's maybe try and go in a different direction. I've actually had those moments where I've said that, but I've also had these moments where I'm like, Julie, stop talking. Like, let it go wherever it needs to go. And I'm like, well, this isn't quite as interesting as the point that I was going to make in my brain, but somehow, some way, it always goes better. And I don't even know what better means half the time. Right. But if you are seeking the guidance of the Spirit, you can have confidence that that's the case. Here's the other thing that stinks about it is that you aren't aiming to please everyone. Good. You are aiming to please the one. And so whoever it is that needs to be reached that day, you can have confidence and trust that that's going to happen if you are sincerely putting yourself out as an instrument to facilitate a discussion versus the person dictating the content.
I love that. You mentioned second guessing, right? I think there is a distinct difference, and I've never really actually thought about this before, but I think there's a distinct difference between second guessing after we do a lesson and critically evaluating.
Right. That's a good point.
Right. I think that if we are second guessing ourselves, we're doing it wrong.
Yes.
Right. Because like you mentioned, it really has to do with the Spirit. I mean, if the Spirit was there and it went well, you mentioned that we're looking for at least the one that we can help there, right? And we may never know, and that's totally okay. Was the Spirit there? Was it uplifting? Great. Sometimes it'll be high energy and you'll go, oh, great. Okay. Oh, and everyone's, yes. Sometimes it won't be that way, but we don't want to second guess ourselves. If we led it by the Spirit, then we did it right.
Totally.
Period.
Agreed. Yep. And the second guessing, I think, comes, like, we have to also remember that Satan wants us to feel insecure.
Right.
And so if the fruit of what you are, thinking about is that you feel more insecure, then you're probably not going down the right path, because I do think that critically evaluating how you did is going to lead to constructive thoughts that are inspiring. Like, oh, I could do that better next time. That's a fruit of the Spirit. And so I think you kind of have to check yourself a little bit as you're doing that to make sure that you're not, second guessing yourself and giving Satan a victory in the process.
I love that. So. I wish I could just quote that right there. Quote that. That's so good. What was that?
Don't give Satan a victory.
That's right. We want God to win. Yes, we do.
Yes, it is true.
Yeah. Well, these are such great questions. I love these because it's these questions everyone feels, right? Everyone is trying to figure out how to do this. And then if we're not dealing with one thing, we're dealing with another thing, but we will be dealing with that thing later on at another point, maybe a few years down the road. And so it's so good to learn these. And we highly recommend anyone who wants to, you can go to teachingrestored.com and we've got a contact form. You can just put in your question, and that's how we get these questions, or comment on the podcast or a video. And we would love to hear these questions that you have. And we'll be doing more of these. I'm looking at, we have a lot of other questions that we could go through. Some of these I think are going to have to be full episodes themselves because they're really meaty questions.
Yeah.
Not that the other ones weren't meaty and valuable, because they are.
But we can kind of get through some of them, right? Like, I think that all of it's valuable, though. Like, we don't know what would be most helpful. So we're always doing this from our own frame of reference. And if we get a little bit of a glimpse into what some of your challenges are, it helps us immensely. So please, please keep commenting and helping us to, go on a choose your own adventure.
Yes, I like that. And by the way, if you have answers that we didn't talk about and you have found something that works in these, let us, exactly. Type it out. Let us know so we can share that with everyone, because we kind of see this as a sharing form. We bring it in from you, great, disseminate it out so more people can hear and understand, because Julie and I, we know some stuff, but we don't know everything by any means. So please share your experiences with us. We would love to share that with everyone else as well. Okay.
That's good.
That's it. That's all. That's all. If you would, share this with others so that they can get some ideas of what they might do, because others are having these experiences too. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Julie. It's been great. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Take care. Bye.